project at first, and then what was then called conflict investigations team.
Conflict intelligence team, actually. Okay, so it all started with the Bellingcat when I was quite interested in what they did about MH17 when they just tried to find out evidence on the spot from videos people from Donbass posted of that book, of the photo of the missile trail that hit the Malaysian airplane. And I just started translating lots of their stuff. This is how we became acquainted. And then, which you could call my first investigation, was when a Russian journalist published an interview with a Russian tanksman from Buryatia who fought in the Battle of Debaltseve. And we just wanted to check that, and we spoke with a volunteer from Bellingcat. We did some stuff together. We found their unit based in Russia near the Ukrainian border. We found convoys riding through Donetsk, which were really similar to what he described: tanks, Kamaz trucks, BMP, infantry vehicles and stuff. Okay, so this was probably what ultimately led to Simon Ostrovsky's investigation on another Buryat soldier, Bator Ambayev. Then when I became actually involved with Lviv's team is when they discovered VK.com posts mourning Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine in May, which was months after the second Minsk agreement, and I tried to help them gather information. For instance, there was a photo of one of those soldiers, Timur Mamesupu from Tatarstan. He was photographed near a distinct separatist BTR personal carrier. Then I just asked people on Twitter, where is this filmed? People from Luhansk, they just told me, okay, it's probably here, we believe, in this particular address. They gave me the address. Then what I did, I found photos, videos from that location, and Luhansk has Street View from Yandex, and using that I conclusively proved that that guy was indeed photographed in Luhansk a month before his death. Then after his mother told Sky News journalists that he indeed was a Serbian Russian soldier, although the Russian military said he fought in the Caucasus. Actually, we know that he was photographed in Luhansk. Then probably my work started in earnest when we started working on Syria, because we were probably the first to break the story of a Russian marine influx at an airport in western Syria. And now I've been doing that. We've been cooperating with Bellingcat on that. We've been proving war crimes committed by the Russian Airforce, and now we haven't abandoned Ukraine or anything. We have been preparing a report about the Battle of Debaltseve, and when I believe when this is aired, you'll have already be acquainted with the contents of that report. I have to keep a secret, but I believe that's pretty big, what we stumbled upon.
What was your primary motivation? Because I mean, first you probably did this for no pay, and what was your motivation of doing this?
Well, my motivation, one of the motivations, as you know, I've left Russia to live in Ukraine because I wanted to live in a free country that's gradually changing for the better, and I think that even the fact that I've been living here and I haven't done anything, I haven't been at the Maidan, I haven't done anything to have the privilege of living in a free country, which means I had to help Ukraine somehow. There is this idea that all Russians should be responsible for the conflict in Donbass, for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, my personal belief with that is that I am responsible for that as long as I haven't done enough to stop it. I've been involved in protests against Putin in Russia, and still I haven't done enough. which means I have to make up for that. I have to do something to stop the aggression, to unmask it. There is another reason, of course, because as I am a patriot of my country, and this is why I believe that our military, our government should be held accountable for what they do. If they are sending Russian soldiers to die for some, they're sending Russian soldiers to die for the interests of Putin and his gang, and I think our society, Russian society, and the world has to know about that. If we are killing innocents in Syria to support the terrorist regime of Bashar Assad, I think this is what we should know about. For me, the example is what happened with the US airstrike at the Afghani hospital. There has been lots of coverage in the media. Bellingcat has reported on that by determining the type of the plane that was involved in the airstrike, and we have seen lots of coverage of this event, and I believe that any country, any military should be held accountable for its doings, for the human rights violations, for endangering Russian people, and of course killing people from other countries. I believe that when they say that there are no Russian ground troops involved in Syria, while we have seen lots of footage of Russian artillery fighting Syrian rebels, not ISIS, I think that any operations should be legal, transparent, and not endanger lives of innocents or aid any criminal regimes. Which is why I am doing what I do.
Do you think other countries should be investigated, like Russia is investigated by Bellingcat and your team?
Naturally, they should. First and foremost, I think it's it's what locals should do, but we've done stuff with Turkey, for instance, when there was this controversy about a Turkish base in Iraq. We actually explored and found out that there are lots of other Turkish bases in Iraq, and that Turkish troops are permanently stationed in northern Iraq, and there are Instagram photos to prove it. And I think that any military naturally should be held accountable. The thing is that currently I think the Russian military is one of the most responsible for the most atrocities, for many atrocities and war crimes, and they are being really untransparent, tight-lipped about it, and that should change. Of course, there are others like Saudi Arabia and actually like what Amnesty International did on Saudi Arabia cluster bombing in Yemen, and it's actually fun how they say, why aren't you, after I believe Human Rights Watch published this report about Russian cluster bombing in Syria, they say, why aren't you reporting on Saudi Arabia? And like the Human Rights Watch people on Twitter, they say, yeah, we do, here's the link. So you have to be transparent, you have to be as impartial as it takes, but for us, I wouldn't say as a particularly impartial, because we want our country to stop these aggressions. We want to stop these violations of human rights and international law, and we aren't journalists, we're activists.
Oh yeah, you mentioned the impartiality and not being journalists. Bellingcat on the other side, they call themselves citizen journalists.
Yeah.
Would you call your team in any way journalists, or you try to avoid this?
Well, we've been doing some pretty unconventional stuff which would be called unethical for a journalist. Just to give you one example, how we actually proved that came to the suspicion that Russia is equipping an air base in Syria way before it was even way before it was reported by Russian media after the start of the bombing campaign. We actually found a post on a forum for young mothers where a woman from Sevastopol was worried because her husband was going to go to Syria, and then we registered under fake identity of another woman and asked her whether that we said, okay, my husband is also going to Syria, do you know what the assignment is going to be? And she just said that he's going there for 3 or 4 months to guard an airbase. And of course that's unconventional. Of course that would be called unethical by Western journalists, but that's what we have to do if we want to really expose Russian operations, if we want to really work with that. We have sources on the ground that can give us some information. Of course, the more we give open source proof, the better, but we do have to resort to such closed source unconventional means, and that probably makes us not journalists in the classic sense of the word.
Does do these unconventional methods, they differ you from Bellingcat, or does Bellingcat also use this?
As far as I know, Bellingcat is more about open source research. They try to exploit they try to keep their sources as open as they can, and it's not like we can afford that. Sometimes we just have to resort to such ways that people could call unethical, and we have to do this, but as to standards, as to for a journalist, for the investigative journalists who are somewhat who are often called like bloggers or stuff, for us the credibility comes from how rigorous our proof is, that we have to do field work, we have to do like photograph a grave of a Russian soldier, because we have to, and for that we have to tell their friends that we are like their comrades in arms. We want to know where they're buried, which of course we are not. We have to work a lot on the unconventional means, and I think that that's what differs us from Bellingcat. Although as to standards, as to the standards of proof, we try to keep it on their level as much as possible, because I think they're the standard setters in modern investigative journalism.
Well, actually, Bellingcat, we published some of your investigations, and I think used lots of your work.
Yeah.
Did you consider teaming up with, joining or merging with them into one team?
I don't think that would be viable or anything, because first of all, they have enough people as it is. Secondly, we often work on different projects, although they might just overlap. Then we already have a pretty great working relationship. There are like people from their team in our chat. There are people from our team on their chat, which means that we already can share all the information we need. We can bring what we can bring to the table is our expertise on the Russian language, on working inside Russia, which my colleague Ruslan does, and what they can bring is some people they know Arabic. They can have some contacts on the ground which we in Syria we happen to not have. While we can do the same in Ukraine.
So you sometimes coordinate your...
we always coordinate our work.
So it does not overlap, for example?
It does not overlap. We always coordinate our work, and as long as there are... we work pretty much in the same field, and I think our relationship is good as it is.
Well, there is another like practical reason for in favor of joining up with Bellingcat, because Bellingcat has now good financing. If I'm not mistaken, I think Eric told me that they have even funding from Google, and you just opened your crowdfunding campaign.
We are planning to get our own financing from some funds, and I think that we can do it on our own. And I think actually being Russian and Russian-based is what makes us more credible. Because if it's some Western team which may or may not work with MI6 or MI5 or whatever, while we are a distinct Russian team which works, you could compare it with Navalny's investigations. For instance, don't you agree that he would be less credible if it was some Western fund that says that our prosecutor general is corrupt? If that's some Western media, Western bloggers that say our Minister of Defense is lying, then I think it's more credible when it's Russians who do it, who call out on their own government.
But still, your reach is more for the outside audience, not internal audience or not internal media, I'd say.
Actually, it only depends insofar as like the majority of media in Russia is controlled by the state, and they will not publish our investigations or anything. They will do an occasional hit piece, and that's all. But we are trying to reach to as many Russian-based independent media as possible. We've been repeatedly featured by Dozhd, by RBK. Ruslan has done interviews about his investigations on Hromadske, which is the last semi-independent radio station in Russia. And we are trying to cooperate with the Russian journalists, of course, because they are the people who can reach out, speak to relatives of the soldiers if we cannot for some reason. We have a good working relationship with Radio Svoboda, the Russian part of Radio Free Europe. Actually, they were the ones who bought us photos from RIA Novosti, which we suspected showed cluster bombs at Hmeimim air base in Syria, unlike what the Russian contrary to what the Russian MOD told. We contacted, we saw these photos, but they were, the previews were just not large enough, didn't have a good enough resolution for us to be sure. So just the Air Radio Svoboda journalist, he just bought those photos from the register to buy photo bank of RIA Novosti, and sure enough, the cluster bombs were there. So we are trying to reach the Russian audience, of course. And even though if in future some of our funding might come from the West, we believe that our ultimate goal is reaching the Russian audience, is being Russian opposition activists, which we are. On this basis, we have a good relationship, I think, with Navalny's team. I actually personally aided them with their investigation when they got hold of information that Putin's press secretary Putin's spokesman was on that yacht that was like way out of his league. There was a selfie from his daughter. What I did, I just saw a video ad of that yacht, and sure enough, I found the background that matched his daughter's selfie, and that's how we try to cooperate with other Russian activists. We cooperate with Russian opposition MPs, few as they are. Like Dmitry Gudkov, he asked, he actually, as an MP, he wrote like an official request as to the fate of those guys who were killed in Ukraine in May 2015. And recently we did get a response that it was a state secret. Which means, you know what a state secret means in Russia nowadays?